The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Hi, and welcome back to an extra special Gaze of Our Lives. I know you missed us dramatically over the winter break, but everybody has to take a little break, you know, even me. But today I am back in the studio with a very, very fabulous and personal guest to me, the one and only Katie, who is also my sister. So I'll give you just a second here to kind of introduce yourself. What do you do here? And we'll get into some topics.
Hi, I'm Katie Mello. I'm Sean's sister. I actually work at the college. I'm here. I'm an administrative assistant for one of the academic areas.
So fabulous. So I wanted to bring Katie in today because I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked a bit about LGBT families, how we form different families, some of the supports we have for LGBT families, but I'm here to talk about my own LGBT family today. So I want people to understand something that I've heard a lot is that being gay is a choice, or that being trans is a choice. And I kind of want to talk about why that's not true. And if anyone can, you know, speak on my behalf here, who has known me my entire life, it would be my sister. So what was I like as a shining little 5-year-old?
Well, you were always flamboyant. Always outside of the box, always very caring, always had a tendency to like bright, shiny, flowery, for lack of a better term, girly type of things. And I saw that from a very early age. We spent a lot of time together. Our parents both worked, so, I was the built-in babysitter. And I've always believed that people are people, from children on up. So I never shied you away from your interests. They were yours. Unfortunately, our father did not share the same view, very homophobic. So a lot of the gifts I would give you would have to be like disguised in something else. I bought you like a sports jacket, and in the pocket I would put like the Polly Pocket or the Sky Dancers or the toys that you really wanted. And you learned very early on that, you used to call me Kiki, and you'd say, well, I know Kiki has hidden gifts.
Oh my God, she's giving away all my secrets. But actually, that's why we're here today, so that's perfect. No, it's the sports jacket that she got me to, the one with the pouch, naturally it was San Francisco, the 49ers.
It's my favorite team in those days, just saying.
Well, we'll allow it. But it was also, I think it was hints for me to look up San Francisco.
Maybe a sublimity.
Just like, some subliminal messaging there. And it's true, so that's what I want people to understand, right? So I never, at no point, did I up and decide to be girly or to be effeminate or to like the things that I liked. It's just what I liked. Mm-hmm. And again, this is shining little 5-year-old, 6-year-old Sean, right? So this is long before I even developed a sexual identity by any means. So when they talk about something like how Drag Queen Storytime sexualizes children, be it when I was 5 and 6 years old, being called something like a faggot, long before I had any sexuality, was kind of a lesson to me that I was being ascribed sexuality just for being outside of a box that I should have been in. Right? So I was technically born with male genitalia, so then therefore I should have been rougher, I should have liked G.I. Joes over Barbies, all these kind of things. But my sister here to attest, right? That's not who I was. It's not, and it was never a conscious choice to like pink and frilly things and be that kind of person. I remember my favorite gift of ever, she didn't even mention, was this giant Polly Pocket sparkly tea castle that you opened and could be a Polly Pocket kit, but was also a tea castle. It was the best thing ever. And I remember I loved that thing. I played with that thing for years and years. And I remember that was one of the ones that you got into a fight with Dad about because no son of mine kind of thing. And I think people need to understand, because I've actually been told by several people that I didn't have any bad experiences as a gay kid. Right.
Well, I think too, we have such rigid gender constructs, especially in Western culture, where to be a feminine is somehow lesser. You know, and I think it really doubles back to that, and because of those rigid gender, you know, roles and stereotypes, that has just permeated every single thing, from the toys our children play to the clothes that they wear. If you're having a boy, you get blue clothes. If you're having a girl, you get pink clothes. You know, in some cultures, you don't see such rigid boundaries. You know, it kind of blurs. You know, like if you go to different Asian cultures, you know, men have worn dresses for years and years and years. So there's a lot more fluidity, I think, in other cultures. I think ours is very rigid. It comes to that rugged, you know, male exterior that you're supposed to represent.
Yeah. I think it comes, and there's this whole idea right now, and you see it with the Matt Walshes, the Ben Shapiros of the world, where, oh, well, what's the definition of a woman then? And right, and there's lots of words have more than one definition. It's not hard to say definition A, definition B, right? If I talk about wood, I can talk about trees that create wood, or would you go to the store with me, right? It's two different words, two different definitions, similar words. It's the same idea with being male and female. Yes, you can have biological female, but then there's also a socially constructed gender identity that is based around what is feminine, what's appropriate for the feminine, what's appropriate for the masculine, how a feminine person should act, how a masculine person should act. That's that sociological constructs and the psychological constructs of gender on top of our biological sex. Right? And so biologically, I was born male, but my entire life, I never felt wholly male, ever, at any point. Right? And when I was in middle school, I remember I used to sit and I would pray that I would wake up as a female. If I was a female, then everything about me would be socially acceptable. I could be flamboyant, I could like boys, I could like pink, I could be feminine, and it would be fine because I'd be a girl. But all because I was born in a male body, that was never going to be acceptable. And I think there needs to be a deeper conversation of what gender affirming care is. What my sister did was gender affirming care. She saw that I liked girl things, and I liked Polly Pocket, and I liked Sky Dancers. And so she went out and got that for me. It didn't turn me gay. That's not how any of that gender affirming care works. What it did was she recognized who I was at my core and honored that despite what society said I should like. Right? And I know because you've had some of your own situations with that because you played sports in high school.
Yes.
Right? So do you want to talk a little about that, how that went down?
Yeah, that was interesting. You know, and not so much the playing sports, although that was still challenging. I remember in the late 80s, there wasn't many girls on the baseball team. I think I was one of 3. And the only time they would let me play is when it was to pitch against our oldest brother. I could strike him out because we'd played pickup baseball for so long, and I knew what pitches he couldn't swing at. But then I didn't really get to play the rest of the time. And that was really frustrating. And I remember thinking to myself, I wish I was one of the boys, because then maybe I get to play more. Or maybe I would be seen as an equal. We'd play pickup football, and I'd always be the last one picked. You know, that was challenging. And then in high school, if you weren't interested in males and you played sports, well, then you must be a lesbian. You know, and I think it was easier for their ego than realizing maybe she's just not interested, you know, and she just likes sports. Again, those rigid, you know, gender boundaries, you know, and that was challenging. Got a little less so as we went on. I remember Mom, some of the stories Mom would tell us, you know, like women are too weak for sports, or, you know, stuff like that. And then, of course, we think it was it Title IX or Title X that came through and helped to really help those female athletes really get the funding that they needed. And really, the teams had to be formed because it had to be, you know, equal teams at different schools and funding and stuff like that. I mean, it's still challenging, but it's definitely different than it was, say, in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s. So.
And I think it's important here, too, right? So my sister, she was technically masculine. She played sports because only men can play sports, but she was heterosexual, right? So, and for me, right, my gender identity did cross over with my sexuality, that even though I was very feminine, I was attracted to men. And again, we develop both of these things in separate silos within ourselves, but they cross and they do intersect, but they're two separate things, which is why I know I've heard a lot of kind of pushback from people who like to talk about people who are trans, people who are trans, and then actually, you know, they transition and they like the sex that they should have liked before, because they're two different things. Again, I've tried to stress this on my show as much as I can here, because I think there's a lack of understanding. And I also want people to understand that it's never a choice of how we come up to what we like, right? We develop that stuff just in a developmental way. And there's no pinpoint, there's no gene, there's no one thing that determines what we're going to like or who we're going to end up being.
And why is it right or wrong?
That-
You know, that's the other piece of it. It's why was it wrong to you for you to like Sky Dancers or Polly Pocket as a kid? Why? Because it made Dad uncomfortable about those rigid, you know, what he feels should have been his son with a baseball or football or, you know. So I think that's the other piece, and I think it goes back to if you being viewed as the lesser.
Yep.
You know.
And I think people also have to understand too that it's also not a hard and fast rule, right? Like I knew other guys who played with Barbies with their sisters or Polly Pocket who are heterosexual.
Yep.
So it's not like that made them gay or that was a forced decision on them or, you know, the alphabet mafia and all these other things that we hear. All it is that we want to allow people to explore who they are so they can become their authentic selves, whoever that may be. Right, and a lot of us, like I'm not the same person I am at 30 something than I was when I was 19. I'm a different person, right?
Absolutely.
So we all still grow and we all develop. That doesn't mean that any decisions that someone would make, saying for transitioning, if they decide to detransition or stop hormones, that see, look, that's proof that being trans doesn't work. And that's not, again, it's such a sad one-dimensional way of looking at something that's complex about our souls, right? And I want people to understand that the way we develop, there's no place that hate and fear really can play, right? Because I think what happens with all that hate and fear, because I knew I would make Dad uncomfortable, I tried to hide myself as much as I could. I denied being gay at every corner, at every chance. I never actually thought about transitioning because what could that even be? And that's an affront to God and all these other kind of messages, right? You know, my first, suicide attempt, I was in middle school. I was in counseling for years because of this. By 12 years old, I had such a sense of self-hatred that I didn't want to live. Yeah. And I think this is where people are getting lost in the message of what gender-affirming care is. It is putting the safety of LGBT kids over the discomfort of cis adults, right?
And I think the other thing that needs to be addressed, being a teenager or being a kid is hard already. You know, and never mind how socialized in terms of social media it is with kids. You know, it used to be back in the day, if you got bullied at school, you could go home and you got to be separated from that. Kids don't have that option now. You know, with social media constantly, you know, at the forefront, you know, and even if you monitor your kids, by the time they get to high school or middle school, they're absolutely on TikTok or Facebook or whatever, you know, other social media outlets that they're using. And then they get that level too, because it's not only their peers, but now they're having to watch the news and they're having to watch protests about things that are very near and dear to them, to just the essence of who they are. And I think that's the other piece that needs to get talked about. Is this isn't it's not a fad, it's not a phase, it's genuinely how the person feels and how they view themselves, and not feeling safe and secure enough to be yourself around people. I can't even imagine, because like I said, that's challenging for any teenager.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Never mind added the other level that you now have to face on top of that.
Because as teenagers, you know, we still, all of our hormones are raging. It's a wild time where you're in this kind of weird pocket of space where you're too young to be an adult, but you're too much of an adult to be a kid, right? Because by the time you're 18 and graduate, you should know what you want to go to college for, know what you want to be, start getting ready for bills, bucko, start ready for taxes, bucko.
Yeah.
Right? So
The
it's
real world.
The real world, right? That comes flying at you real fast. And I think people tend to forget that it's not anything that's different. We're not asking for special rights. It's just an added layer of complication that we just kind of have to figure out for ourselves. Is really what it comes down to. And I really worry that people really truly believe that it's like some sort of game that we're playing, or it's some sort of for special attention seeking and all of this kind of stuff. And I think that's just a sad way to kind of look at it, because what it really is people trying to live in the bodies that they're comfortable with and form the relationships that they want that will support them in their lives. Because I think it's super important to know, I will note it 1,000 times, gay people are not the only people with a sexuality and gender identity. Every single person on earth has a sexuality and a gender identity, right? The sexuality piece around how you feel with your body, what you want to do with your body to form relationships that are intimate, right? And then how you actually see yourself as a woman, as a man, as an ex, as something different that is, you know, culturally ingrained. There's a whole different culture here in America than there is in, say, China or South Africa. So there's all these kind of understandings and pressures that is just, it's on everybody anyway. So again, it's not that we're asking for any sort of special treatment other than allow us the space to figure it out. That's all gender affirming care is, right? So to kind of switch gears, because we have other LGBT people in our family, what was it like for you to raise my LGBT nephew?
That was challenging for a number of reasons. Quite eye-opening at the same time. I think the biggest challenge was I knew the obstacles that he would face when he came out to me. You know, when he first came out to me and kind of, you know, just to kind of do like a temperature check with his sexuality at first. And then when he finally came out to me, I said to him, I said, CJ, doesn't change who you are as a person. But I have that mindset and that view where I don't, first of all, I don't think anybody should judge another person for their own choices and their own identity and all of that. And furthermore, you're still my child, will be my child forevermore. And then I got a lot of sadness from people that knew me. Well, that must be very hard for you. You must have had all these hopes and dreams. My hopes and dreams for my child are still there. I mean, it was definitely like taken back because for 14 years and the child had been my daughter, and now, and I think it was more worry and fear because I knew, you know, and unfortunately there is hatred out there. And I knew all too well what he would face, even to the day when he turned 18 and was determined to fly to South Carolina. And we're very loud and proud in our family. Wow. So, you know, I had to have that uncomfortable conversation. Like, you're going to be in an area of the country that is not as
Different
welcoming.
culture, yeah.
You know, you've always come from a background where you could be yourself, you know, at least within your family. You know, but he dealt with his own, and I had to, as his mom, kind of hold his hand through that for something I've never lived through myself. You know, and, you know, we went back and forth, and, you know, I think that the issue of hormones had come up, and my concern was, you know, from a sociological, emotional standpoint, yeah, I was in favor of that, but from a physiological and a mom standpoint, because I know what hormones are like at 14, 15, and 16 years old. Yeah. And I was like, you know, CJ, I'm like, I really would prefer if you wait till you get a little bit older, and then you can make the decision yourself. I didn't know enough about it. I mean, just to you know, so I scoured as much resources as I could. I started reading up on things, and I tried to honor him as best as possible. You're seen. You know, we know you, we love you, we accept you. I did have to ask him for a minute on the pronouns, because in those days, Meme too, and his grandmother. It was challenging in the beginning because, you know, old habits die hard, and it wasn't that I wasn't honoring him. CJ was easier. It was the pronouns that I'd have to catch and correct myself. And in those days, it was so very personal for him, and he was young and kind of coming into his own, that he had to correct every time. Yeah. You know, and I finally said to him, and I said, you know, and it was in my own frustration, I'm like, I'm really trying. I am trying my hardest. It's been 14 years. You have to give me a minute. Yep. You know, and I remember several times where we had dealt with some homophobia at a high school he was at, and issues over bathroom usage, and him kissing somebody on the bus and being caught on camera, and I was the only parent in there, yet I know he wasn't the only kid making out on the bus. They were teenagers, high schoolers, you know.
I've known a few.
Yeah, but yet I was the only one that had been brought in. Yep. And, you know, and I actually called the vice principal out on it. And we don't want rumors to get started. And I'm like, but are they really rumors? You know, my kid's feeling this way. You know, and coming home to me and reporting to me that he feels singled out, and he feels, you know, he has a target on his back, and, you know, and it's really interesting because when we switched to a local high school, completely different, you know, red carpet got rolled out, very accepting. Even the registrar, God bless her, she was like in her 80s. She's registering us for school and turns to CJ and says, all right, what is your preferred name and what would you like me to list? And I got emotional because this had been a long ride for us. And I got a little teary-eyed, and she said, oh, no tears. No tears, and she gave me a big hug. And she said, all they really need is love. And I thought to myself, it's not an age thing, because this woman is in her 80s and has seen years of life and lots of transition in society and in culture and everything else. And yet here she is meeting my 15, 16-year-old where they really needed to be met. And I remember us driving home, and he had the biggest smile on his face, and it made him feel seen. And like, yes, like I'm finally at a place where I can be myself. And I remember a couple of weeks later, I'd gone in to drop some paperwork off, and there's my kid, you know, kind of like a politician who runs in the family.
Runs the family. It
Yes,
does.
and then waving to everybody as if he'd finally found his niche.
Some tribe.
Yeah, and he had found a tribe, and they had made concessions to allow him to go to the nurse's office to use the bathroom, and they had put all kinds of accommodations in place, and I saw him blossom, you know. So I think when we're given tools, whatever those tools are, people grow, and it's regardless of, you know, identity or gender or sexuality, you know, people are people, and they have needs, and I think that's the conversation that needs to be had.
Yes. And speaking of that conversation, that's actually a conversation. We've been on a couple points I want to talk about here because it goes fast. So
I know, and I talk a lot.
No,
sorry.
no, I love it. That's why we're here. I love the stories. This is my family, so this is deeply personal, and y'all can love it or hate it. You don't have to watch YouTube if you don't want to. But a couple of points here. So one, I would ask that parents of LGBT kids don't ever think that you can lose your hopes and dreams for your child, because you're still going to have your hopes and dreams for your child.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, what you really want for your child is to be happy and successful in their own ways. And that is irrespective of gender, their identity, how they change, transition. It's all about wanting them to be authentic and live their authentic lives in a way that makes them happy. That's what any parent should want for their child. And the second point here, I would ask some of my fellow LGBT people, my trans brethren and sisters and siblings, to be more patient too with our family members, right? To be more patient with your parents who might misgender you. A lot of it is not malicious, right? They've known you, they birthed you into this world in a certain way, and it just takes a minute for them to transition too, right? I don't want them to kind of have this idea that, oh, my daughter died and my son is reborn, you know?
Right.
You know, it doesn't have to be all that.
And I had that conversation, because
Yeah.
I said to CJ, I said, all I want is for you to be happy.
That's it.
Whatever that looks like, you have my full support. I'm like, but when I'm running late for work and I'm trying to get the three of you out the door and I accidentally call you she, I really don't mean it, and I'm
Yes.
still accepting it's ingrained,
Yes.
because for X amount of years, that's what it's been. So I think that's the challenging as a parent as
Yes.
well.
And so, to these ends too, you guys know I work full time at Recreation. We have a program called Safe Spaces. You can give us a call at 508-679-0922 if you want help with this. We run parent groups, we're running empowerment groups, we're partnered with other local agencies to help on this issue. And the last point here that I also want to drive home, when you talked about accommodations for CJ, accommodations for me, that's not special rights. That's not what that is, right? That's called equity. That is giving the people what they need in order to get, excuse me, to the next level, right? That's what that is. An accommodation is not a special right. That'd be like saying putting in a handicap ramp is a special right. It's not a special right. It's allowing access in different ways. Absolutely. And I think people need to understand that, especially when it comes to start coming to some of these medical decisions around hormones, or as they get older, gender reassignment surgery and all of these things. You know, I've talked about one of my favorite people. I don't know if you guys, Valentine's Day is right around the corner, so that means the Grammys just happened, right? And Kim Petras and Sam Smith. Sam Smith identifies as non-binary, and Kim Petras is a trans woman, and they were one of the first people to actually win a Grammy. But I would be remiss, is what I had to double check. Wendy Carlos was actually the first trans woman who started to transition and had gender reassignment surgery in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And she had won 3 Grammys for some of her work on soundtracks.
Oh.
So there's, trans people have been around for a long time. At no point, again, my sister's already mentioned this, I've mentioned it before, this is not a Tumblr fad. Being trans didn't happen just because autistic people started to happen more, right? People are like, oh, well, autism's a new thing. It's not, and it's also not a new thing.
Right.
It was just labeled very differently for a really long time. And so I want people to understand that LGBT history and LGBT people are part of history. We're part of the fabric of society. We're here, people, I work at Recreation, Katie works at BCC, that's my nephew. This is, I've brought in other families here who are good friends of mine who all live in Fall River. We're all people just trying to create our own paths. And we're not special. We're not demanding that you come to our parades and all these things.
And historically,
Just love.
And I think the other piece that gets missed a lot is historically, you know, like I want to touch on something. You had mentioned that transgender, you know, the idea, and people have been around for a very long time. I mean, you go back to the Civil War, there were countless women that would dress as male soldiers because they wanted to serve their country. And there were countless, you know, female pirates that would dress as males or female cowboys that would dress as males to be accepted. I mean, we don't even know if that's why. Maybe they really felt that way, and we just didn't have something to identify or coin it at that time, or really were even aware of it at that time. I mean, this goes back to the 1800s. But I mean, the Native Americans or certain cultures have what they call rainbow people, where they realized, and two-spirited people, you know, so it's been around for thousands of years, so it's not a new concept. It's the idea that it's starting to become safer, not safe, for folks to start to step out, you know, and be seen fully.
And I think people also kind of need to remember that what we're doing here is just trying to reach a place where it's not just tolerance, but true acceptance. I think we've gotten to a place in America where gay people are tolerated, right? We're allowed to be on TV, there's movies about us, we're in shows. We do have some visibility and representation. Visibility and representation.
I have a gay best friend.
I have a gay best friend. Visibility and representation that, A, took a really long time to get, and B, did not change all of our experiences and all of LGBT history that is now erased. Oh, well, there's a gay person on TV, so gay people are just fine.
Right.
That's not how that works. Right, so what we need to understand is taking the time to improve and learn where we can. A quick story in the last couple minutes here. I remember when Mom first found me cutting up her sheets and making dresses, because she had really cute sheets. They were like pink with like flowers on them.
And you'd already borrowed some of my dresses.
And I already borrowed some of Katie's prom dresses. That is just a fact. And I remember like she caught me like red-handed because I used to hide it so hard. And I was 8, maybe 9. And I remember she sat me down at the top of the stairs and she talked to me about how there's other cultures and how there's different ways of viewing masculinity, and that there are men who wear skirts and kilts in Scotland. There are all different kinds of ways that we can do this. So it's not this, again, it's not this autistic Tumblr fad and these like ridiculous things that you hear. We've always been here. And there's all sorts of different ways of looking at gender. And there are children, there are siblings, we're just people who are looking for a way to remove the hatred, right? Because so you guys, I've talked about our drag story time, and our drag story time had actual literal Nazis come and tell us that drag queens are pedophiles and that we're wrong and that they're trying to save our souls. And that can be really traumatic to you know, we're trying to read some stories with a kid, have a cute story time. Right? I actually did the last one. I was adorable. You can look it up on our Fall River Pride Committee page. And understand that it's more inappropriate to scream obscenities at children than to come have a frank conversation with me.
And be dressed in full military dress and be scary.
Versus come have a conversation with me about, hey, let's talk about what's appropriate and not to talk with our kids about. My existence in and of itself is not inappropriate to talk about, right? That's not how this works. Saying that someone has 2 moms or 2 dads is no more inappropriate than saying they have 1 mom or 1 dad or they're being raised by their grandparents. It's just different ways that we structure ourselves and our families. And for those of you who want to talk more about this, again, at Safe Spaces at Recreation, the second Saturday of every month. This month is the 3rd month. It's the 3rd Saturday, the 18th, at Recreation 12 to 2. We'll be having a community conversation about drag story time, and gender affirming care is our topic for March. So we'll be continuing these conversations. And there are people that are here who are allies who will talk about this, who are ready to put out their stories so we can start to change the narrative from hate to love. And that's what we're about.
And to add to that really quickly, I think the biggest message I try and tell folks, it's not really for you to understand. It's not really, you're not ever going to understand somebody's.
You don't have to accept.
You don't have to accept.
Yes.
I know, because my ex-husband has mentioned many times that it was my crazy liberal agenda that was the reason. And obviously life has rolled on, and even his own dad has come around mostly.
So we live, we learn, and we grow. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.